Well, good morning, everyone. It's a real honor for me to be here. Thank you for showing up and listening to me at this workshop. Over the past few years, I have dabbled in collecting vinyl records. Are there any vinyl record fans here? Yeah. LPs, they call them, the big platter things that you put on and a little needle goes. It's amazing technology. Well, recently I found that I needed to upgrade my turntable. And so I purchased a system with stereo speakers. So now I've got a speaker on the left and a speaker on the right, and the sound is so rich and warm and inviting. It's been a terrific upgrade to my study. Now, the neat thing about stereo speakers is that if you get up close to them one at a time, you'll notice that they're playing different things. For example, the speaker on the left might have a little bit more electric guitar, and the speaker on the right might have more keyboards coming out of it. But no matter the differences between those two speakers, they are playing the same song. My talk today is entitled Sirens in Stereo, and that's what I mean by stereo. In our particularly fraught and polarized society, it can feel as though we are constantly assaulted by competing messages, marketing, ideologies from two opposing directions, from the left and from the right. And sirens is not a reference to the blaring noise you hear from an emergency vehicle. A siren is a creature in Greek mythology, made most famous by Homer in the Odyssey. You might remember Odysseus and his men sail past an island where sirens, creatures with unimaginably beautiful voices, sing to entice sailors to shipwreck and die. Odysseus has his men, of course, stuff beeswax into their ears so that they can't hear the sound of the sirens, but he wants to go without ear protection. So he has them tie him to the mast, and he tells them, when we sail past, don't untie me no matter what I say. He wanted to hear the sirens. So this is all a metaphor then, by which I mean our contemporary culture wars are increasingly sirens in stereo. Alluring voices from opposite directions entice us to embrace worldviews and ideologies that will ultimately leave us shipwrecked. From the left, as you've just heard, the challenge ought to be familiar enough. An ascendant cultural Marxism that views traditions, historic norms, long-standing institutions as toxic enablers and perpetuators of injustice that must be razed to the ground so that a new age of peace and harmony can emerge from the ashes. The siren song from the other direction might be more unfamiliar to you. A number of reactionary movements have emerged on the right that seem to sing a different tune. In fact, they seem to sing an opposite tune. Whatever the other side is for, we are against. But on a closer listen, we shall discover, much as you might with a stereo system, that they are actually playing the same song. They too wish to tear down traditions, norms, and institutions so that their version of utopia might emerge. Now, I'm not just talking about politics. Politics is downstream from culture, as the saying goes. And I am much more interested in the cultural background, or the soil. That is, the worldviews, the ideas, ethics, the social aims that eventually finds expression in partisan politics and public theology. What I'm really talking about is religion. The sirens, you see, have religious convictions and aims that eventually find expression in particular political stances. But I'm getting ahead of myself, and I am assuming too much. If my metaphor of sirens in stereo is to hold, it stands to reason that there must be a middle somewhere. What's in the middle? Odysseus had a ship to protect from the siren song. What am I trying to protect or preserve? In other words, if two opposite extremes are squeezing or pressing in on something, what is that thing? That thing is liberalism. Now, when I was growing up, liberal was the word that we used to describe someone who is now today called a progressive. That's not the kind of liberalism I'm talking about. What I mean is something more generally called classical liberalism, which has, in fact, much more in common with historic American conservatism than it does progressivism. Classical liberalism is notoriously difficult to define. Understood in its broadest scope, it is the political system of ordered liberty that has prevailed in the Western world for the past 300 years. It is a complex of mutually reinforcing ideas that includes things like a commitment to individual equality before the law, representative government, private property rights, and wide freedoms of economic exchange, speech, religion, association, all of which produces a robust civil society, or what we call the private sector, and a limited government, a limited state. That's classical liberalism. And the emergence and global influence of this tradition, which is nowhere found more profoundly than in the American founding, has produced unprecedented global prosperity and improvement to quality of life by nearly every measurable statistic. There is, nevertheless, no shortage of academics, intellectuals, and politicians who, for varying reasons, decry this way of organizing society. And as I say, they come from two directions. Left-wing collectivists have always found liberalism inconvenient to their totalizing aims. So it's unsurprising to find criticism from that direction. You can't give people too much liberty. They'll abuse it. Somebody's got to be their parent, and it will be the state. Voices now on the right are unfortunately joining that chorus. What I want to suggest to you this morning is that the classically liberal order, while certainly in no way perfect, and it is indeed a continuing work in progress, ought to be defended. And it ought to be defended not simply because it has worked or because it works, but because it is a hard-fought and hard-won fruit of the Christian religion. The time allotted me does not give room for a full treatment, but I want you to consider historian Tom Holland's recent critically acclaimed book, Dominion. In that book, Tom Holland, a wonderful historian, he argues that our notions of individual liberty, freedom of conscience, equality under the law, the idea that every human being has dignity, and many other things besides, they are all provided specifically and exclusively by Christianity. All of those notions of human rights and equality before the law, did not exist in antiquity. It was the advent of Jesus Christ that brought about this great revolution in humanity's understanding of itself and of the world. Well, Tom Holland is not alone in noticing this. In 1933, Westminster Theological Seminary founder J. Gresham Machen was alarmed by the blatant and extreme attack on civil and religious liberty represented by Russian communism and Italian fascism. More worrisome for him, however, was that these totalitarian impulses were being found right here at home. He lamented what he called the machine, the relentless growth of the paternal state, the centralization of power, bureaucratic standardization of everything and control, the tyranny of the expert. And Machen was particularly worried that this involves the erosion of other important institutions of a free society. Machen lamented that liberty itself had begun to fall out of favor. He wrote this, quote, "Despised though liberty is, there are still those who love it. And unless their love of it can be eradicated from their unprogressive souls, they will never be able to agree in their estimate of the modern age with those who do not love it. To those lovers of civil and religious liberty, I confess that I belong. In fact, civil and religious liberty seems to me to be more valuable than any other earthly thing, than any other thing short of the truer and profounder liberty which only God can give." Close quote. We are thus in very good company in loving and wishing to preserve the civic and political system of classical liberalism and to defend it against its detractors, both progressives on the left and the so-called post-liberals on the right. They are singing a song in stereo. The progressive left has long been post-liberal. Progressivism's American political founding father was President Woodrow Wilson, who lamented the U.S. Constitution. Isn't that amazing? A president who laments the U.S. Constitution. It was an archaic and useless hindrance to the implementation of an all-encompassing state that would order society according to scientific methods. Now, in more recent times, progressivism has supplemented that emphasis on scientific method with the ideology of critical theory. Critical theory seeks to expose the inherent underlying injustices and oppressions built into the fabric of society and its institutions. It is a cultural form of Marxism. You see, whereas Marx saw the distinction between oppressor and oppressed in terms of economics, you have the haves and the have-nots. Cultural Marxists see this same inequity or imbalance everywhere. Race, sex, gender, sexual orientation. Critical theory seeks to expose and break down the social constructions that prevent the full equality and self-expression of these minority groups. In an essay that might as well have been written yesterday, C.S. Lewis explains how critical theorists combat these social constructs. They do not bother refuting an opponent's argument, but rather explain why their opponent is self-evidently wrong. As in, let me explain to you all of the socially constructed factors that molded you into the evil oppressor you are. That's how they argue. Lewis called this the fallacy of bulverism, and you hear it constantly in these common maneuvers. You only say that because you are a capitalist pig. You only say that because you are white, male, cisgender, heterosexual, fundamentalist, bigot, and so on. Lewis sharply observed, quote, "Now this is obviously great fun, but it has not always been noticed that there is a bill to pay for it. There are two questions to be asked to people who say this kind of thing. The first is, are all thoughts tainted at the source, or only some? The second is, does the taint invalidate the tainted thought in the sense of making it untrue or not? If they say that all thoughts are tainted, in other words, because you're a capitalist, your thoughts are tainted, or because you're white, your thoughts are tainted. If they say that all thoughts are thus tainted, then, of course, we must remind them that Marxism is as much a system of thought as Christian theology or philosophical idealism. The Freudian or the Marxian are in the same boat with all the rest of us and cannot criticize us from the outside. They have sawn off the branch they are sitting on. If, on the other hand, they say that the taint need not invalidate their thinking, then neither need it invalidate ours, in which case they have saved their own branch, but saved also ours along with it. It's impeccable logic. But I don't think that C.S. Lewis, with all due respect, quite appreciated just how serious critical theorists are. You see, they exempt themselves from this logic. Nowadays, they dismiss logic itself as an artifact of white supremacy. More important than that, Lewis failed to grasp that these people do not view themselves as being in the same boat with the rest of humanity. They are Gnostics. It's an ancient heresy of the 2nd century. They are Gnostics in the full sense of the word, gnosis. The Greek word just means knowledge. Gnostics are knowing ones, those who have secret knowledge. These knowing ones are initiated into the secrets of the cosmos and the souls of men. They have the secret insight, the vision, and the techniques to tear down the order of reality and to bring into existence the parousia, the coming, the arrival of a new utopian paradise. Gnosis, or secret knowledge, is the key to achieving this. And it is no accident that in our day, these practitioners call themselves woke. Woke. They've been enlightened. They are self-appointed, God-like emissaries, liberators of the elect, judge, jury, and executioner of the reprobate. In the case of Marx's own political program, I mean that literally. As a matter of historical record, gulags, firing squads, and mass starvation are the fruits of this rotten tree. It's a religion. You see, they have a theology, even the atheistic version found in communism. As Nietzsche observed, once God is dead, we replace him. We ourselves become the divine. We are all united as part of the divine spirit animating all things. There's no transcendent God who created, orders, governs, and judges the world, and thus man becomes, in the words of Protagoras, the measure of all things. Man becomes God. They have an anthropology. They have a doctrine of man. And it is this: there is no fixed human nature. Since, as our own gods, we self-create who we are. Our sex, our gender, our species, you name it. The only thing truly fixed are obviously false platitudes that we are all born good and hate must be taught. They have a doctrine of sin. Sin is something purely external. You see, we act in bad ways because of something outside of ourselves. It might be our upbringing, it might be our environment, our circumstances, but mostly because our entire society is structured by oppression. The man is keeping you down. You bear no personal responsibility. They also have a doctrine of salvation. If we are awakened or awoken, or if we are born again to see the structures of oppression, invariably associated, by the way, with the institutions and moral norms of Western Judeo-Christian civilization, and in this woke state, we jackhammer all the way through the foundations, seeking to level all hierarchies, because all hierarchies are inherently unfair. If we abolish private property and redistribute all the resources, then all poverty and suffering will end, and we can all live blissfully in an eternal burning man festival. It's the doctrine of salvation. I don't think Burning Man sounds like heaven, but they also have an ecclesiology. They have a doctrine of the church. Did you know that? Heretics must be canceled. They must be punished and hounded out of the community. True church members must memorize, recite, and properly deploy orthodox creedal statements about a host of animating doctrines like privilege and oppression. And violators may be restored only after extreme self-abasement and emotional self-flagellation. If your violation is bad enough, say it was an off-color joke you tweeted a decade ago, you will probably never overcome your shame, and you will not be allowed to peacefully work and live no matter how sincere your apology. Yes, this all contradicts their operative version of sin, but we cannot expect consistency, okay? They have an eschatology. They have a doctrine of the last things. We can, in fact, with our collective powers, bring about heaven on earth. We do not await the return of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. The goal of judgment and eternal blessedness and reward is entirely up to us, and we must make it happen. Revolutionaries generally add, at least implicitly, Malcolm X's phrase, "We must make it happen by any means necessary." And the past century or so has witnessed the murder of approximately 100 million people and counting at the hands of people entranced by the Marxist religion. That's what it is. It's a competing religion. But there are also self-styled conservatives who also think the American founding was a mistake. And that those like me who defend and champion classical liberalism are naive. We're outdated relics of the past. These are post-liberals. And by that, they do not mean that they are just opposed to progressives. They mean that they are ideologically and psychologically beyond post-classical liberalism. They believe that the basic principle that government exists to protect natural, intrinsic, God-given rights, that is, to protect individual liberty in an ordered space in which one might pursue happiness or blessing or flourishing, they believe this is mistaken. For them, government exists to define and shepherd society toward a single common good. It does not just protect the liberty of people to pursue some desired end. It protects liberty only insofar as it is used toward the end of which government approves. The government first dictates what happiness and blessing and flourishing are, and then protects your right to pursue that happiness, blessedness, and flourishing, provided you have the requisite stamps on your government paperwork, so to speak. The government is here to help protect you from your depraved self and to help you become the best version of you. Now, if this sounds like a very strange brand of conservatism, it should. Usually, it is progressives who are intolerant of all the structural barriers to ushering in their vision of the common good. Their fantastical utopia of total equality or equity, where the government provides for every need from the cradle to the grave, and nobody has to suffer the indignity of being referred to by a pronoun they haven't themselves invented. See, progressives don't like the fact that our system doesn't allow small majorities to lord it over minorities. And that's why they say things like the Electoral College must go away. We can no longer have a Senate filibuster. We must expand the Supreme Court. You see, we have to get these impediments out of the way so that we can use government coercion to usher in our vision of the common good. To reward our progressive friends and organizations and corporations who are committed to right think, and to punish and hound out of polite society our bigoted enemies. The people cannot be allowed the liberty to define what is good because the people do not know what is good for them. They need the state with its wise central planners and philosopher kings to perfect their natures. Now, it may sound different coming out of the right-hand speaker, but post-liberals are playing the same song. Post-liberal advocate Sohrab Ahmari says that he wants to, quote, fight the culture war with the aim of defeating the enemy and enjoying the spoils in the form of a public square reordered to the common good and ultimately the highest good, close quote. He has a gleaming utopian vision too, you see. A senior editor for an extremely popular right-wing website wrote the following, quote, the government will have to become, in the hands of conservatives, an instrument of renewal in American life, and in some cases, a blunt instrument indeed. Blunt instrument means a vast expansion of government power and coercion. He then considers, quote, to those who worry that power corrupts, and that once the right seizes power, it too will be corrupted, they certainly have a point. If conservatives manage to save the country and rebuild our institutions, will they ever relinquish power and go the way of Cincinnatus? It's a fair question, and we should attend to it with care after we have won the war. Close quote. Now, anyone familiar with history ought to know that every tin pot dictator from Robespierre to the present day said precisely this: trust us. We've got to break a few rules to save the nation. We will relinquish all this power once we've won. Pinky promise. You see, progressives coming out of the left speaker and post-liberals coming out of the right speaker, they alike hate constraints. Both desire the state to enact by coercion and force of law their vision of the good. What they want is power. The very thing the American founders so wisely and self-consciously and aggressively diffused throughout multiple and layered institutions, local, state, federal, with checks and balances, 3 branches of government, a bicameral legislature, and so forth, all underwritten by a constitution designed to shackle the government to very limited spheres of influence. You see, the system was designed to keep hotheads from rewarding their friends and punishing their enemies. It's designed to keep small factions from imposing their will on others, and to keep even small majorities from lording it over minorities. And the ironic and extremely telling thing is that both progressives and post-liberals have convinced themselves that the American system of classical liberalism gives the other side an unfair advantage. The progressives lament all the structural roadblocks. They lament all the laws. You mean to tell me we have to pass a constitutional amendment to change that? What a hassle. Can't I just go to the Supreme Court and have them do it like we did in 1973? The post-liberals, on the other hand, lament liberty. They call it individual autonomy. They lament liberty because by means of that liberty, some people live badly, and they convince others to live badly. And it has in fact been by means of that liberty that the left has taken its astonishing and effective march through the institutions and have taken over our culture. You see, progressives think that law keeps them from winning. Post-liberals think that liberty keeps them from winning. And I happen to think that that speaks perfectly to just how amazing is the American experiment. It leaves all power-hungry narcissists unfulfilled. Progressives have always been unapologetic about their desire to tear down the thickets and hedges of constitutional law so as to wield unencumbered the levels of power. Conservatives have always unapologetically championed individual liberty and have cherished those thickets and hedges of protection. Like Mattson, they have always considered it more valuable than any other earthly thing. They have always recoiled at the idea of concentrated coercive power in the hands of a few. But apparently this is no longer true. Now, the peculiar danger of the new right-wing version of this kind of statism is that it very often wraps itself in the language of Christianity. Complicating matters even more, it is true that the left will call anyone who desires Christian virtue and ethics to have any influence whatsoever in the public square a Christian nationalist. And one should rightly scoff at such convenient bad faith labeling. Not everyone who is pro-life or opposes the LGBTQ advocacy deserves such a sweeping label. At the same time, we should not be blind to the fact that there are people who are Christian nationalists in the sense described, seeking to bring about a Christian society by means of top-down government coercion. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, Abraham Kuyper and his brand of neo-Calvinists wrestled mightily with the question of how a nation with a variety of divergent views could coexist without the violence and bloodshed so historically common on the European continent. Kuyper adamantly resisted the siren call of authoritarian power seeking. For him, it was a matter of theological conviction that the political order, particularly the coercive power of the state, must allow the rain to fall on the just and the unjust, to use Jesus' words. Equal treatment that reflects God's equal treatment. Not just liberty for our side, but liberty for all sides within the bounds of God's moral law. Kuyper took his cue from a parable that Jesus told, and it goes like this. The owner's servants came to him and said, "Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where then did the weeds come from?" "An enemy did this," he replied. The servants asked him, "Do you want us to go and pull them up?" "No," he answered, "because while you are pulling the weeds, you may root up the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest." Matthew 13:27 through 30. Brothers and sisters, there will not be a pure, unmixed society. There will not be a wheat field without weeds in it until the end of time, until the harvest. There is no utopia in the present age for the left or for the right. For Kuyper, God's will, the mandate of King Jesus himself, is a polity of freedom, tolerance, forbearance, an open public square where antagonists could build their own institutions and seek to persuade one another, equality under the law, freedom of religion, conscience, speech, and assembly. You see, for Kuyper, what we call classical liberalism is simply what King Jesus requires of the institution that bears the sword. Oh, he heard all the objections, all the ones we hear on the lips of the post-liberals today. But what about those people? Don't you know how evil they are? They're abusing the rules. Whose side are you on? Kuyper knew that this commitment to a structurally pluralistic society would be unpopular. And he knew the dangers as well. But he didn't think that the dangers were any worse. No, he thought them far less worse than the dangers of totalitarianism and authoritarianism. Kuyper was more afraid of an unrestrained, coercive state than he was of kooky ideas. He thought kooky ideas, like, let me just use one that he couldn't possibly have imagined, like men can get pregnant. He thought that kooky ideas could be dealt with by way of free and unfettered public debate. Let the tares and the wheat show themselves and let the truth win out. Was he wrong? If he was wrong, it isn't obvious to me. But what if Christians are losing the public debate? What then? What if society seems dead set on careening down a path of decadence, debauchery, and wickedness? Isn't it time to break glass in case of emergency? By having the state define and enforce the common good, once we've taken over, that is. Presumably only then. If not the state, what will be the source of the morality and virtue necessary for the maintenance of our civic order? How shall the people as an aggregate both attain and maintain the kind of common worldview needed for societal peace and prosperity, if not at the behest and direction of the almighty state? The answer, as the American founders understood it, is the people themselves in what we call civil society. Cultural associations and institutions cultivated by free people to promote and maintain morality and virtue. Individual liberty from government coercion does not mean for a moment a lack of community and commonality and ties that bind. There are myriad institutions that shape and form human beings, and some of them are inescapable. The family, for example, nobody chooses those. You don't choose the family you're born into. But civil society encompasses so much more. The church is part of civil society. Civic organizations, philanthropic and charitable foundations, educational institutions like the one across the street, industry and trade organizations, the economic marketplace, arts and culture, and more. The whole warp and woof of social fabric is woven by the institutions of a free people. And in America, it is free associations that bear the burden of cultivating and inculcating human morality and virtue. We do not look to the state to provide this service. At least we're not supposed to. The modern public education system is a notable and influential aberration to this principle, and one we would do well to rethink. You see, we are ideally to be influenced, tempered, corrected, and shaped as moral persons by our families, by our churches, by our teachers and our professors, our friends, our neighbors, our colleagues and associates, even our beer buddies at the bar. The guys with badges and guns, they are at the very tail end of that line. And even then, their task is limited and constrained. Do not look to the state to make moral people. I admit that sometimes this reliance on civil society doesn't seem to be working. Immorality and vice is everywhere. One political party seeks to constantly enshrine this debauchery in law, to lord it over the other half of the country. We're a deeply divided people. We don't share a common vision or common values. We've been morally shaped by antagonistic worldviews. Whose fault is that? Is it our system of government? Is it our failure or hesitation or cowardice about wielding power? Hardly. Brothers and sisters, it's a failure of civil society. That is, it is a failure of ourselves and of our own cultural institutions. It isn't time to break glass in case of emergency. It is time to stop the finger pointing and take a good hard look in the looking glass. The old adage that we get the government we deserve is an adage because it's true. We are free men and women in a free country. No one is stopping us from worshiping God and discipling others or planting churches by the thousands. No one is stopping us from proclaiming and teaching and persuading others about the truths of God. No one is stopping us from starting schools and colleges or universities or forming cultural or artistic guilds that shape and form people to love truth, goodness, and beauty. No one's stopping us from starting journalistic enterprises or media organizations. But we don't have to even be that grandiose. No one is stopping us from starting a neighborhood Bible study or hosting a backyard barbecue where we can talk to our neighbors. If it seems And I'm not by any means conceding this point. If it seems that an overwhelming majority of people in this country despise our morality and despise our virtues, is it not due to our own obvious failures? Our churches may have failed. Our schools, colleges, universities may have failed. Our think tanks may have failed. Our magazines, our journals, our websites, our podcasts, and our newsletters may have failed. Our persuasion may have failed. And it is just in that moment, confronted with our failure, that some of our intelligentsia, left and right, blame the classically liberal order itself and reach for the silver bullet or the strong man or the ring of power that will stem the tide, compensate for our cultural impotence, and enable us to wield the levers of government to reward our friends and punish our enemies. Illiberalism, the deep desire to deny to others the rights of conscience and belief and property that we ourselves enjoy, and to force them into conformity to our vision of the common good by way of coercive state power, is the last resort of people who have lost the culture by their own hand. Illiberalism is for cultural losers. Brothers and sisters, I have a better idea. Resist the sirens in stereo and seek to bolster and grow the great middle that they are squeezing. Reform our weak institutions and engage again in civil society. That is, use our liberty to proclaim the gospel, to promote truth, beauty, and goodness in every facet of life and society. If our civil and religious liberties really are, as Mattson thought, more valuable than any other earthly thing, it is an everlasting shame that we would not exercise those liberties and instead seek the foolhardy shortcut of power and coercion. In order to do all this, in order to freely reform and build our institutions, we need the state to be the classically liberal state, the exceptional one that keeps its fingers off the scales and protects our very liberty to proclaim the good news of Jesus Christ. Thank you very much.